Hi everybody, welcome to the 17th episode of Storytellers. On today's episode, we're sitting down with Sheila Ward from LOCA restaurant in Wyoming, Ontario here. Sheila's a teacher turned restaurateur who launched her business in the midst of the pandemic. Hope you enjoy. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Sheila Ward from LOCA in Wyoming here. Sheila, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it, inviting us to your beautiful restaurant here.
Thank you for coming.
Let's start the episode like we do all of them. Tell us your story.
My story is a bit of a meandering story.
Sure, we love that.
So the meandering story starts somewhat with a career in education. So I was an elementary teacher for 21 years before I got to be a restaurateur. Long time ago in my early 20s, I had notions of becoming an artist. I did a degree in sculpture and drawing, and then nowhere when they wanted in the wanted ads, sculptor will pay $35,000 plus benefits. I decided to become a teacher. Cool. And because I was bilingual, having grown up in Montreal, found that there was a real need. And as I got into that career, absolutely loved it, and loved it for decades. Yeah. And then through the years of education, found that, doing things with students that involved food, doing things with students that involved ecology, environmentalism, kind of led me down the path into gardening. And my mother was a flower gardener, and I had already tried that and failed miserably, so I thought, let's try food. So I started gardening, and I went down the rabbit hole of gardening and started really learning a lot about the health of soil, of understanding what makes an heirloom seed, and wanting to understand why losing the variety of cultivars in our food was important to environmentalism. And as I was learning more and more, I was bringing that back constantly to the classroom. And so that turned into things like starting a school garden at one of the schools I was teaching at. We got a grant from TV Friends of the Environment and built quite a garden at our school, or volunteering on farms with students, helping kids who are in grade 8 get their volunteer hours to go to high school by working on farms and teaching kids about the value of the nitrogen needed in the soil that's depleted by growing things and how animals play that role. So I think that I just, discovered on and on that I was a real naturalist. I was really interested in foods. My husband was a blogger. He actually had a blog called Book Face, for those who like to have their face in a book. And so he said to me when he saw me gardening a lot, he says, you like to take pictures. And so that kind of cycled back to my degree in fine arts. And he said, you like to cook with what you're growing. You like to talk about what you're doing. You should start a blog. Yeah. So it's still actually up and running. It's called Roots and Leaves. Cool. It's a blog for the kitchen gardener. And it's all recipes based on what's in season, what was in my garden. And so that slowly or organically became where I am now, in that I started to have this dream. I had this dream of having a restaurant. I was, feeding my family with what I was growing. I was feeding friends with what I was growing. I was becoming intensely interested in the environmentalism, and not just the ecology of what I was doing by cooking with things that were seasonal, but also the economy of it, of finding that more and more local meant more and more just microeconomy and finding what I needed in my immediate environment. And so that was a path that through years was just, no, you can't do that. No, this is what you're doing. And it's finally come to this now. Awesome. That dream was just somehow fueled, somehow spoken to, and somehow answered. And now I have a restaurant. Awesome.
So how long was it from when you kind of found your passion for gardening to jumping into the restaurant game?
I'd say it's probably been about a decade.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's taken 10 years. So this restaurant has been 3 years in the making. Part of that was slowed by COVID, of course. Yeah. But getting into gardening, in education, we often talk about multiple intelligences. And so I think there hit a point in middle age where I realized that, the naturalist education and working with my hands was something that was really important to me. And more, especially as more and more technology was coming into my profession in education. And I embrace technology fully. It's very useful to me in business right now. But found that I needed to go into a different path that was more using my hands. Again, my first education was in sculpture. And so found that was a real place of happiness and joy.
Good for you.
Yeah. I don't think there was anything more affirming than I heard it was on CBC radio one morning. They were talking about how people who worked with their hands, people who had hobbies, and people who worked in service to others had less mental health issues. And it was a real moment for me where I discovered that why I was finding joy in working with my hands and serving food to people and serving food with either things that I had grown, or as it became more and more as I went on in what I was doing with what other people were growing, why that was making me very content.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can absolutely attest to that. During COVID, I found, the dark days, I like to call them, in March, April, when it first hit, I needed to get something to do to get my face off Facebook all the time, and falling down that dark hole. So I started leatherworking. And working with your hands just to take your minds off all the other chaos out there was a great outlet for me to kind of figure out a path forward through all that. So that's awesome.
Well, we forget sometimes that we're animals, right? And we need purpose. And I think COVID has really exacerbated that for most of us, is that, what is my purpose? What defines me? I get up every day and I do what? And so when you're able to work with your hands and see the product of something that you've made, there's something on a real basal level that makes you feel like a purposeful human being.
Absolutely. First off, I'm going to applaud you, because to go from a teacher with a salary and vacation and summers off and stability and all that, to a restaurateur, which could be the exact opposite.
Which is pretty much close to that.
Absolutely. It is something that most people don't have the stomach for. So that's fantastic that you took that leap.
Thank you.
That's awesome. And that's kind of why we do this series, is to kind of hear those stories and hopefully inspire others, that just because you start as a teacher doesn't mean you have to end as a teacher. And there's always opportunities to kind of grow and evolve, like you mentioned.
Yeah. And I would say that, in these times, unlike, let's say, my parents, who had, one job, one type of career, their whole life, a sense of vulnerability in this age, it's also a sense of freedom in that there can be many chapters. And so I knew I was taking some major risks. I had a lot of people who said, so, you're leaving, tenure teaching to open up a restaurant during a pandemic. Are you LOCA? And I said, well, matter of fact, I think there's been a lot of double entendres that have come into the name LOCA. But it was definitely some major risk taking. And I think that especially having been a teacher for that many years, coming from a family who all worked in public servant work, realized that I had a certain kind of life helmet. And only at age like 46, 47, did I realize that this must be how life should go. And didn't realize that was actually guiding me, and found that I was a bit of a closet entrepreneur. That the creativity and the kind of earlier years of fine arts and creation also was kind of burbling and becoming entrepreneurship. And so just kind of shifting that helmet, or allowing myself to break out of it to see other possibilities, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The
fear of the unknown.
The fear of the unknown is just, it's up to you. It's entirely up to you now.
So what was the straw that pushed you over the edge to say, now's the time to do the restaurant?
It was honestly, it wasn't one straw. I would say that a lot of it came down to the physical space. There's ideas, but then where are you going to put that idea? And so that idea in the beginning was things like hosting events, yoga retreats, and doing their farm to table lunches, pop-up events.
So you go to them basically.
Microbrews. So I've been going to them, farmers markets, setting up. And then it was, was it going to be a food truck? It's just trying to imagine the physical space. And then it was literally pounding pavement, looking at buildings that were empty, and going to the roll book at township municipalities and saying, who owns this? Because not finding physical spaces. We actually had a space before this space in Kamlaki that didn't work out, that I walked away from. There was just structural issues in the physical building. And so I walked away with my idea, my dream, and thought, okay, well, this isn't going to happen. And I was at that point thought, it's going to be me maybe publishing a cookbook. It's going to be called The Girl Who Never Opened a Restaurant, And then I walked by this building and it was empty, and I did what I do, and I went to the roll book and I looked up, and he met me within 5 minutes, and I started renting it. Then renting it has now progressed to owning the building and living above it.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
So you're all in there.
We're all in. We're absolutely all in.
So kind of walk us through, what's a normal day-to-day look like now that you're full-time restaurateur?
I would start by saying that there are normal days, in that there has been so much to adapt to.
That's what makes it fun.
It is, and it's absolutely what makes it fun.
Yep.
Within the business itself, there is definitely some routine that has come to establish itself. There's definitely been the rollout of different, COVID-19 measures that we've adapted to as well. But my day often starts at 5 a.m.
Yep.
So get up very early. Although I find now that we're 4 months into it, I'm actually some mornings treating myself to 7 a.m., even 8 a.m. occasionally. And then I'm in the kitchen and I'm prepping until my staff comes in. But I wear a lot of hats in this place. So I'm also doing all the ordering. I'm also paying all the bills. I'm doing the payroll. I'm managing the beverage, making schedules. And so within a day, I find most of the time I'm in the kitchen. The kitchen is still my place of passion.
Good.
And
Yep.
it's where I have to be to always feel that this is something that I put together with an idea of where it would go. And I think eventually I'll be less in the kitchen, and I'm becoming more realistic as I find myself sometimes 15 hours in the kitchen, that I need to step back to be able to do all the other pieces better. So that's been a real part of the learning curve. But on any given day, it's cooking, it's out talking to people, it's helping servers with the POS. It's setting up gift cards.
Yep.
It's it's doing things like this today.
Exactly.
I mean, it's all over the place.
Yep. Yeah. What part of it do you like the most?
I would say the part I love the most is seeing the food go out and seeing the reaction of people. Yeah, is that window up there of our kitchen, gives us a glimpse out into the dining hall. And so when you put something together, and the presentation of our food is equally as important as the quality of the ingredients and the taste of it. So when you put that out and then you see it go to a table and the reaction, that's when I have that moment of
Fulfilling.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's why I'm doing it.
Yeah. The one thing I could say, and I think anybody watching this that has started a business, wears all those hats as long as humanly possible, is don't be scared to start to shed off some of those hats as you get going. I find a lot of people kind of get stuck into that rhythm of thinking they need to do everything and they can't delegate, and then it turns into more of a job as opposed to a passion.
I completely agree with that. And I think that I knew from day one, when the first day that we opened, and it was just my sous chef and I in the kitchen, and we put out 84 chits, the two of us. And it was probably our highest sales day since we've been open. It was just incredible. Awesome. But I remember thinking, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
And then I went to kind of the other end, where I brought in more staff, and then my bookkeeper and I looked at our labor costs, and then I went, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
So somewhere
Finding
there's
that
a
balance.
sweet spot
Yeah.
of how much of my labor I use to make sure that all those other numbers are in check, so that this is thriving and it's viable. And it's more of an art than a science.
Absolutely.
Because it's always revolving. It's always adapting to different things. But all part of the learning that's been happening.
How have you found the whole hiring process and having employees? That's an eye-opening experience for many when they start to dive into that.
I think that because of my background in teaching, that kind of naturally was some skill sets that I had when it came to hiring people. We've been really lucky where in this industry right now, many people are really short-staffed. We probably could use more, but we are sitting with enough staff that we all do the job well together. But things like just the nitty gritty of having staff, of all the forms we have to fill out. I was a neophyte. Learning about all the remittances that I have to do. All of the obligations that I have as an employer. There is tremendous responsibility.
Absolutely.
As you know, and so just really. Learning constantly and just checking off things on a list and making sure I was doing what I needed to do, but also beyond the pragmatic stuff, making sure that bond and those relationships were happening with staff, so that they were believing in what I was believing
Absolutely.
in. Yeah.
That I think a lot of people get the theory that your employees work for you, but it's the exact opposite. You're working for your employees, right?
I couldn't agree with you more on that. I actually had a almost euphoric experience, and this too is coming from teacher in the past with a young staff member on Sunday, and every brunch we do slightly different food. So every brunch there's slightly different ways of doing things in the kitchen, and I was getting overwhelmed with how much I had to do in front of me. And when we had a lull between chits, she said to me in her young years, she said, we really need a system. And I said, you're absolutely right. And right there in that moment of lull, we developed a system together. And I knew that she was able to tell me, we really need a system here, because my sous chef, who I'd hired, had trained her very well.
Yeah.
And so it was this whole circle that just kind of closed in that
Perfect,
moment.
yeah.
And I'm lucky enough in middle age that I don't have these kind of, egocentric notions of,
Yep.
well, we're going to do it how I say, and so I was just listening to her, and that was the teacher in me. And then when
Yeah.
we got back in the next chits, and we were just flying.
That's awesome.
We were doing a great job.
That's going to be the key to your success here. The fact that you're not so, egocentric and thinking that it's my way or the highway. Because
Yeah.
I see a lot of businesses that fall into
Yeah.
that rhythm, and nobody wins at that point,
Yeah.
right? So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
18 years old,
Wow.
the staff member.
Yeah.
She taught me how to do things well on
Yeah,
Sunday.
and I don't care what
So,
anybody says about
yeah.
millennials. They're the hardest working group
No,
there is.
I've got some
Yeah.
really hardworking young people
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
place. Absolutely, right down to our dishwashers who are in grade 9. Who, if you've seen, all the stuff that they have to scrub off
Yeah,
pots
yeah.
and put through, and so I'm pretty proud of
That's awesome.
the people who work here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, in the day-to-day here, there is so many things going on at any given time. What kind of tips or tricks do you use to stay focused and productive?
I say to stay focused and productive, I'm definitely a list maker. And as trivial as it sounds, just in the morning, I'm constantly making mental lists, and then those mental lists become written lists of just making sure, this, and then that. We have a lot of ways in the kitchen just to prioritize, write down what needs to be done, and so that focuses us constantly. And then from there, it's also, if this is what needs to be done, let's be productive by saying, if you guys take this, I'll take that, and she'll take this, let's go.
Divide and conquer.
We divide and conquer, absolutely. So in a given day, that's probably the biggest, machine behind how we stay focused and productive is just list making, prioritizing, and then sharing the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize, or I guess, what's your theory on work-life balance? I've been reading a lot about this lately.
My theory on work-life balance is that it's very important. And I think in some ways, doing what we're doing, some people would say, well, you own a restaurant, and like an old world entrepreneur, you live above the restaurant with your family. And so while that means that work is very close to home, and you may think that means there isn't balance, it's actually what's helped us be able to do some balance. So I think it's really important. And so more and more, I'm trying to find ways to do what we do really well and work really hard. But I also have 3 children and a husband. We have a little dog, and so there are other things that need me. And so knowing when it's time out, and being able to go upstairs to literally take dinner up to my kids up the stairs, being able to be down here very early in the morning when my daughter's still asleep before school. Those are the pieces. And so we knew when we were going to start a restaurant that the only way to do it is if we were actually physically in the building too. Because to leave and to come to work, that would have
too much of the travel.
Been a deal breaker. Yeah.
The theory I've been reading a lot about lately is work-life integration as opposed to balance. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It can kind of coexist, and we can achieve the goals we want to achieve as a business owners, but then still have the family aspect kind of integrated into it. And I think that's exactly kind of what you're living here.
Case in point, my middle son is now doing dishes for Sunday brunch. And so discovered that not only is he a really awesome employee, but it's some great bonding for us.
Absolutely.
When all the staff is gone, he loves just classic rock. We put it on in the kitchen, we blast it really loud, we get the job done, and mom and son have had a good afternoon.
It's great.
That, and I find too that it's, even though it's really, really busy, that we've also had the opposite, some of us, not all of us, through COVID, where we weren't working a lot. And we see when you're not working a lot how time can just fly by, and you're not really aware of your time. So if there's anything we've done as a family is to balance things, is that there's times when we work and it's a lot of work, but when we're not working, we really have quality time. And do we ever enjoy that time? It's just, it's so
disconnect.
It's so precious. It's so precious. It feels that much more precious.
I 100% agree with you. You mentioned COVID. Let's jump into that topic. And this is our new section here since post-COVID. March 17th, we get the call that everybody's shutting down. Tell me what went through your head. Tell me how you handled that.
So that was one of the most momentous, I'm sure, for many people. For us, we were
still get goosebumps when I think about it.
Just thinking where we were then, and fortunately, we hadn't started a business yet. So I'm a really lucky entrepreneur in that I wasn't open and then having to react to it. I had this idea in the wings, waiting to go. And so when we heard what was happening, we were on the very precipice of purchasing our commercial building. We were on the very precipice of selling our house. we are on the very precipice of moving our entire family,
Wow.
of taking a leave of absence from teaching to start
Yeah.
a business. All of that was in the wings, right leading up to
Yeah.
when COVID hit. And so there was a lot to think about.
Well, that's a
There was a
completely
lot
unique
to think-
perspective that
yes.
most didn't. Yeah.
So that risk taking
Yeah.
that we talked about, and
Yeah.
you know, kudos to you for shifting. There was that added, that added sense of, do we do this now, or do
Exactly.
we just say like that's not worth it? Are you,
Yeah. The easy decision would be to stay down the path
to stay
you're
the
on.
course.
Exactly. Yep.
Absolutely, to stay the course would have
Yep.
been the easy decision. And then we just decided that we were going to still commit because this dream just was not going to go away.
Good for you.
I had, I was like a dog with a bone, and this is what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And
No
so
damn virus is going to stop that.
no pandemic's going to get in my
Yeah.
way. But it also came with some blessings in that what it forced us to do was to slow the plan down by a
Yeah.
year. So whereas we would have opened, not this past summer, but the summer before,
Yep.
we decided we'll just open a year later.
Perfect.
My husband was laid off through COVID, so I actually had to go back to full-time teaching
Yeah.
during the beginning, and I was full-time teaching and trying to get this building physically ready to become a restaurant. So there was a lot on our plates.
Yeah, no doubt.
But it also allowed us to slow down the timeline,
Yeah.
which I think 100% has been the success, has allowed us to be successful.
Yeah. So let's talk about the topic of success. How do you define success?
That's an interesting one for me because having been a public servant all of my career so far, is that I'm probably not a very good business person so far because I don't define success by money.
Yeah, that
Yes.
definitely isn't a common denominator, I
So
think, for people.
it's
Yeah.
definitely necessary, and it's becoming increasingly critical and important,
Yep.
and also fun. But I think that when we jumped into what we were doing, my husband and I both said, my partner, we both said that as long as we can pay our farmers and pay our staff and keep the lights on and do this idea and do it well, that's success.
Yep.
And so I remember in the first couple of weeks where I would sit down and pay the bills, and I would pay all my farmers, and I would do payroll, and I would pay my staff, and I would turn on those lights in the morning, I thought, we're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was definitely
And that,
definition of
I
success.
think that concept is there. People think that, people get into business just to make the millions of dollars and go retire on a beach someplace. But through all these episodes we've done, you don't hear it very often, if at all. I'd have to go back and watch them. It's more of that passion and enjoying what you do, and basically what you said there is that common thing that most people that are successful in business start to share that same concept. It's not all about the money. It's everything else that comes with it. Yeah.
And I think that by virtue of that being our focus, hopefully what will come, and we are starting to see the low-hanging fruits, is that because we're very committed to the idea of what we do and the people of what we do, that we're starting to have a real, amazing set of customers and feedback, and people are coming to our business, and they often comment on that.
It's been a breath of fresh air for this town, that's for sure, to have somebody like you roll in here and do what you do, make such an incredible product out of this place.
And that just spurs us on.
Absolutely.
The more that we hear that from people, we're just that much more committed and that more energized to do well what we're doing. And so that's where I feel that, eventually, most restaurants lose money statistically in the first 2 years. And so when I got my books for my first month, and I had neither made or lost money.
That's a win.
I had a net zero in month one.
Yeah.
I really took that as a metaphor.
There you go.
Of you're doing it.
Yeah,
And so just keep doing it
Yeah.
and building it. And
Good things will come. Yeah.
And you have to adapt, and sometimes I'm already seeing now that there's the honeymoon stage, and there will be times where you're going to have to hustle, and you're going to have to change what you offer, and you're going to have to promote, and you're going to have to advertise more, and all of those things. And we're so willing to do all those things to make sure
That's
that it
awesome.
works. But the initial success was just can we pay the farmers, can we pay our staff, can we keep those lights on,
Absolutely.
keep going.
When it comes to marketing, I think I know somebody can help you out.
I do too.
Mentors. Have you had any mentors or anybody you work with along the way to kind of help you, guide you to this point?
Absolutely. Although I would say that through COVID, one of the really frustrating pieces is that, as a past teacher, I really looked for teachers. I actively looked for teachers. In some of the feedback I was getting when I was submitting my business plan, it was, look for mentors, look to work under people, because I didn't have any experience. But in that time, reaching out to restaurateurs and during COVID,
They had too
and
much
so
on their
when
plate
I
to begin
yeah,
with.
or they had let go of their regular staff,
Yeah.
so they didn't feel good about bringing in somebody, even just to observe,
Yeah.
like a new person in anything. I just wanted to go and watch and ask questions,
Yeah.
and so I was really denied a lot of that in the year and a half where I was really trying to
Yeah,
do that. That being said, there have been some standout people. Brian Lavery is a restaurateur in London who has Blackfriar Bistro.
Okay, yep.
And he does the food and drink, not the LCBO, but the food drink magazine out of London.
Sure.
Contributes to that. And he really took me under his wing, had me to his restaurant to sit down and chat, looked over my business plan. Local people like Paresh Thakar had sat down with me, looked at my business plan, gave me advice,
awesome.
listened, came out when we first opened. So there have been a lot of mentors, and then people who I don't know personally.
Yeah.
Whether it's people like Alice Waters of Chez Panisse, who is considered the mother of farm-to-table restaurateurship in Berkeley, California. Or Chef Thomas Keller. Through COVID, I watched a lot of just teach yourself videos from other
It's
people.
incredible what you can learn, even on the self-education piece of going online and everything like
Totally.
that. It's night and day. Has there been any defining moment so far that, you might have already touched on this, but a defining moment where you've realized that, hey, I've made this is working, this is going?
Yeah, I think one of the best defining moments was because when we first opened up, it was just takeout. And so we were seeing customers come in, of course, and there was that interaction. And then it was patio, our little wee Wyoming patio, we call it. And so, again, some interactions with customers. But when it became dine-in, at one point I was in the kitchen and my server, Julia, came to me and she just tugged me and she says, you have to come out in the dining room and see. And I'll get emotional because I came out in the dining room and I saw. She said, I just want you to see this. And people were eating and drinking and the music was on. And all of a sudden it was just that feeling of, I'm doing it.
That's
we're
awesome.
doing it. It was a defining, you can tell by my emotional reaction, it was a defining moment. And I'm really pleased that I had a server like her who would not let that moment go unnoticed. She took the time to come and grab me and say, there's something you should come and see.
That's awesome.
Yeah. She's also the same server where I have a blackboard in the back office where I often write messages for myself. Yeah. And those messages have changed over time. Sometimes they were things like just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Just believe. When I opened up and we just got slammed that first day and I just thought, I don't know if I can do this. The chalkboard started to say things like, this is harder, this is going to be harder than you think. And the same server had scratched out harder and put the word better. And so the resource of people in this place has been absolutely, I would say to anybody starting out in business is that no matter what gadget you're selling, it's always going to be the people.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, the resource of the people, the personalities, the teamwork, the support, just the sense of, and I always say that they're almost like our shareholders. Whether it's the farmers or the people who work in here, they are like our shareholders.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received, kind of along your journey?
The best piece of advice I've ever received is to take your time in responding. And so when you have whatever the issue may be in business and life, and so you feel that guttural feeling of you have to react now, is that's often when we make errors. And so to do things well, just to take the time to process and to make your decisions and to move forward slowly. I can honestly say that that's one of the best pieces of advice that I had. I had it from a principal in a school. It served me very well in business, where if something is not going well or how you expect, just kind of stopping and taking the time and planning and processing and then moving forward again, In terms of advice, though, that I've learned myself and would then in turn share with other people.
Somebody going down the path of even the restaurateur path. I'm sure there's a lot out there that might be thinking about that.
Yes, and I would say, first of all, expect it to be very hard work. Is that I can honestly say I have never worked harder in all of my life. My uncle won the lottery in the 1990s, and he was a chef, and he opened a restaurant. And he said to me before I opened a restaurant, he said, I always wanted a restaurant until I did, because he was the hardest working millionaire he knew. It is a lot of work. It is extremely rewarding. So So I would say that the advice is, expect to work hard. And just when you think your threshold of working hard or your maximum of working hard is this, it'll be upped.
Yeah.
You will have to up that ante, and you will have to answer that, because when you own it, it's like a newborn baby. You have to show up. You have to step up. You have to meet that. And then you find you're tapping into reserves that you didn't know you had.
You're building new muscles is what it is.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And I think that, if it's something you want to do, but you're scared, and I think a lot of people would be scared,
Yeah.
I would say, absolutely do your homework. There, in the years that I was waiting and COVID was there, and, it was things like business plans.
Yeah.
It was teaching myself how to do a lot of things. It was general contractor
Yeah.
in this building and trying to bring spaces together. And so commit to learning, absolutely commit to learning, absolutely commit to working hard, but also allow your thought process to change. If you think that this is what something should look like, know that thinking might be expanded.
Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
I see myself probably living on the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that we did through COVID, and we've bought into something wonderful, but we've also made tremendous sacrifices. My husband, my general partner, and myself, in that we gave up a family home. And so we gave up kind of a forever home to live in a 2-bedroom apartment above a restaurant. And so through COVID, we'd bought land in Cape Breton Island, in a little town called Pleasant Bay on the ocean.
Wow.
And so we are flanked by a 1-room schoolhouse and a Buddhist monastery. And so I really have the idea that this will be eventually handed over to somebody else.
Cool.
And whether that's my children, or I have other talented people in my life who have interest in running a restaurant. I think it'll be kind of the legacy of, I really wanted to build this.
Yeah.
I built it, but the teacher in me, the mother in me, wants to hand it on then to
Cool.
somebody else to carry on.
Start another adventure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Whale watching.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, that it's almost good to, when it's not almost, it's amazing to have these opportunities to sit down and to talk to people and have, because you're so always doing it.
Yes.
You're doing it always, and you don't have the luxury of reflecting.
Yeah.
And when you are reflecting, and maybe it's just the way I am, but at the end of the day, I always used to look as a teacher too, what did I do wrong? What could I have done better? Yeah. And in a day here, it's, what do I need to do tomorrow? And that's the driving force. And so it really does produce positives, but you don't have a lot of time just to kind of linger and think.
I get you. And the other piece of that is that speaking to other entrepreneurs or like-minded individuals is incredibly valuable, and I find it so rewarding, which is why we do this at this series. Unless you've been there, you really don't get it. So it's to be able to share those stories and bounce those ideas off each other, I think is incredibly important as entrepreneurs.
They're your colleagues.
Exactly.
So you need that collegiality.
Yeah.
And so I find that is one thing here, is that even though, as you've heard in this interview, my staff is critical to the success of this restaurant, and they are my colleagues in a sense, but they're not fellow entrepreneurs. And so one of the things that happens that I love when I go out to the farms and do all the pickups is I often talk to other people about, their challenges, their successes, what they're looking forward to, what they're afraid of. And so those are my colleagues.
Yeah, the risk takers.
Yeah, they are. And without them, you would be very lonely.
Absolutely.
And you would probably be working on some questions longer had you not had that conversation with them.
It's the concept of turning decades into days, learning from somebody else's mistakes to be able to kind of cut that learning curve down.
Yes. And as I used to say to my little grade 2-3s, mistakes are proof that you're trying.
There you go.
So if you're making mistakes, if you're asking questions, if you're trying to figure things out, it's because you're putting a lot of effort into it. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about.
That's awesome. So for the first question, number 1, are you a morning person or a night hawk?
I would say definitely a morning person. As you know, I get up at 5 a.m. sometimes for this job, and I completely turn into a pumpkin at 10, and not just in the month of October.
You do better than me, yeah.
Yes.
I'm usually out by 8 o'clock. So
there you go.
You prefer to read the news on your device or in a paper?
Definitely in a paper.
Yeah.
I would say I've become farsighted the last 3 years over trying to read on a device. And so even read, or I like to watch the news. I like to listen. I'm a CBC girl. I'm always listening to the radio in the car when I'm out picking things up. So that's how I get my information.
Perfect.
Yeah.
What's your favorite social media platform?
I'd have to say Instagram. only because being in culinary, it's very photograph
Yep, yep.
focused, and so we have been really graced with a lot of positive feedback on the photographs that we put out there. It's something I love to do. It's something that harkens back
artistic
again
side
to the
really
artistic
helps with
side,
that. Yeah,
the
yeah.
aesthetics
Yeah.
of the food as well,
Yeah.
and so Instagram is very geared that way.
It's an interesting perspective. Having
Yeah.
the artistic background mixed with culinary lets you kind of do things differently and see it differently than somebody jumping into it,
Yeah,
right?
and something that I enjoy. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
that part of just capturing that perfect picture,
presentation
and
even
that
is-
story
yeah.
that goes with it
Cool.
is a real joy component to this business
Perfect.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
City life or country living?
definitely country.
I was gonna guess
You can't
that,
be a
yeah.
farm-to-table restaurateur and say city life.
What's one thing that's on your bucket list?
I've always wanted to go to one of those resorts where you like canoe in, or kayak in Costa Rica, a kind of eco resort.
Yeah,
It's something
yeah.
that my husband and I always talk about. My partner in business, our honeymoon, we camped 4 days. We've never
Wow.
really been on a trip.
Yeah.
And so we've often talked about, just going to some place like
Jumping
that.
in, yeah.
Yeah, hearing
Cool.
the birds and
Yeah.
lying in a tent in the Amazon.
Cool. Biggest pet peeve?
Oh, biggest pet peeve. I don't have I'm a pretty tolerant person. I would say probably biggest pet peeve is trite questions like that.
Haven't heard
Sorry,
that
Matt.
before. It's a good one. What's this might be a tough one. Your favorite food?
Favorite food, of course, all over, and
Yeah.
I'm going to say that food that's local.
Tell me
seasonal
greasy
and
hamburger or
fresh.
something. That would just.
On a personal level, I would say I love things like Thai food.
Yeah.
In my own cooking, aromatics really drive the way I cook. So, for example, garlic, ginger, fresh herbs, aromatics, things that
Yeah.
give aroma to food. So I love Thai food for those kinds of freshness pieces, and the lime and the cilantro
Yeah.
and coconut milk. And so I would say, my real go-to and love of food would be those flavors.
Cool. Dogs or cats?
Definitely dogs.
Clean desk or messy?
It's both. So
Organized chaos, what I call
it's
it.
organized chaos, or it's cyclical. I
Yeah.
have a lot of cycles, and so
Yeah.
I go through a very clean desk at the beginning of the week, and
Yeah.
then accumulates. But I don't let mess pile up in
You
my
do a
life.
little
And then I
reset,
clean
yeah.
it, and I
Yeah,
do a
yeah,
reset,
yeah.
and then go again.
Cool.
Yeah.
And last but not least, what's the song you want played at your funeral?
So I hope to live for a number of more years. But when we get to a funeral, there is a song by John Prine called "In Spite of Ourselves" that I would probably have played. I grew up with a lot of John Prine. My dad's a guitar player and a singer, so I grew up with a lot of John Prine. But it's also a really funny song.
Yeah.
It's quite hilarious, actually, and I'm an Irish wake kind of girl.
Cool.
And so I think it would have to be a party, so it's a funny song.
There you go.
And it also speaks to the love between my husband and I. And I think that, if he's still living, it'll kill him to hear that song. And if he's not, everybody will just know how much we love each other.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sheila. This has been a blast. Your story is truly inspirational, and I hope a lot of people
so.
get a lot from it. Yeah.
I hope they do. Thanks,
Great.
Matt.
Thank you.